In 1991, a salvage crew dragging sonar equipment across the floor of the North Atlantic picked up something that should not have been there. Sitting upright in nearly 400 feet of water, roughly 200 miles off the coast of North Carolina, was a ship, a large one, steel-hulled, heavily corroded, and completely unknown. When the crew checked every available maritime database, every insurance record, every naval registry from the last century, they found nothing. No name, no flag, no record of loss. According to every official document in existence, this ship had never sailed, never sunk, and never existed. That discovery opened a mystery that has haunted maritime historians for over 3 decades. Because the ship was real. It sat on the ocean floor with its hull intact, its cargo holds still sealed, and its construction details pointing clearly to the early 1940s. A wartime vessel. And yet no government, no navy, no shipping company, and no archive anywhere in the world has ever claimed it. This is the story of a ghost that left no footprint, and what it reveals about just how much was lost, hidden, or deliberately erased during the most devastating conflict in human history. To understand why this wreck is so disturbing, you first need to understand how thoroughly the sea is documented. Every commercial vessel that has sailed in the modern era is registered. It carries a name, an official number, a flag state, and an owner. When a ship sinks, it enters a second layer of records: insurance claims, casualty reports, survivor testimonies, and Coast Guard investigations. During the Second World War, those records became even more detailed because the stakes were astronomical. Allied shipping losses in the Atlantic were tracked obsessively. Every convoy, every torpedo strike, every U-boat engagement was logged by British Admiralty intelligence and cross-referenced by American naval operations. The Battle of the Atlantic was, at its core, a war of numbers. Tonnage lost versus tonnage built. Ships sunk versus submarines destroyed. Every vessel mattered. So when a steel-hulled wreck from that era turns up with no corresponding entry in any of those records, something has gone very wrong. Either the documentation was lost, the ship was operating outside normal channels, or someone made a deliberate choice to ensure it would never be found in the paperwork. The wreck sits in a region known informally as the Graveyard of the Atlantic. The waters off Cape Hatteras and the Outer Banks are home to hundreds of known shipwrecks, many of them casualties of German U-boat operations during 1942, a campaign the Germans called Operation Drumbeat. In the early months of that year, U-boats ravaged merchant shipping along the American East Coast with almost no resistance. Tankers, freighters, and cargo vessels were torpedoed within sight of shore. The losses were staggering, and, for a time, deeply embarrassing to the United States Navy. Some historians have argued that certain losses during this period were underreported or quietly buried to avoid public panic and political fallout. That context matters, because it suggests a possible explanation for how a ship could vanish from the record entirely, not by accident, but by design. Divers who have visited the wreck describe a vessel roughly 350 feet in length, with features consistent with a wartime cargo carrier. The hull plating, the rivet patterns, and the general construction style all point to shipyards operating in the early to mid-1940s. But there are anomalies. The ship carries no visible name on its bow or stern, which is unusual even for wartime vessels that were sometimes painted over for security. More strangely, some of the internal fittings do not match standard Allied construction. Certain valve assemblies and pipe configurations suggest manufacturing origins that are difficult to pin down. Some researchers have speculated about Scandinavian or even South American shipyard involvement, which would place this vessel outside the normal convoy system entirely. There is another possibility, and it is the one that keeps historians awake at night. During the war, both the Allies and the Axis operated ships under false flags, borrowed registries, and temporary identities. Intelligence operations moved cargo on vessels that were never meant to appear in official records. The British Special Operations Executive, the American Office of Strategic Services, and various naval intelligence units all ran covert maritime operations in the Atlantic. Ships used for these purposes were sometimes registered under shell companies, given false names, or simply left out of the books. If they were lost, there would be no public record of the sinking because there was no public record of the voyage. Could this wreck be one of those ships? A vessel that sailed in secret, carried something that was never meant to be documented, and then went down carrying its secrets to the bottom of the sea? The sealed cargo holds are a significant detail. Most Atlantic wrecks from the war era have been broken open by decades of current, corrosion, and marine activity. The fact that some of this vessel's holds remain intact suggests either unusually robust construction or cargo that was specifically secured against the possibility of loss. That in turn suggests someone expected the ship might not make it to its destination and wanted whatever was inside to survive the sinking. No formal archaeological excavation of the wreck has been conducted. The depth, the location, and the murky legal questions around ownership have kept serious research teams at a distance. Without a registered owner or a flagged state, the wreck exists in a legal gray zone. Salvage law is complicated enough when you know whose ship you are dealing with. When the ship belongs to no one and no nation, the jurisdictional questions become nearly impossible to untangle. And so the wreck sits, year after year, slowly corroding in the cold Atlantic darkness, holding answers that no one has the authority or the funding to retrieve. What we do know is that the official record of wartime shipping losses is far less complete than most people assume. Thousands of pages of British Admiralty documents were destroyed in post-war administrative purges. American naval records from the early 1940s contain gaps that have never been satisfactorily explained. Entire categories of classified shipping movements were never declassified because the files themselves no longer exist. The assumption has always been that these gaps are the result of bureaucratic negligence or wartime chaos. But wrecks like this one raise a harder question. What if some of those gaps are intentional? What if certain ships were meant to disappear? If this story has pulled you in, if you find yourself wanting to know what is inside those cargo holds as much as I do, take a second to subscribe and leave a comment with your theory. These kinds of forgotten mysteries only get attention when people share them, and your engagement is genuinely what makes it possible to keep digging into stories like this one. Now here is where the mystery deepens. In 2003, a retired naval intelligence analyst who had spent years cataloging wartime shipping records reportedly told a maritime history conference that he had identified at least 11 vessels in the Atlantic theater that appeared in no official record of any nation. 11 ships that sailed, that sank, and that were never acknowledged. He claimed that at least some of these vessels were involved in covert logistical operations supporting intelligence networks in occupied Europe and North Africa. The transfer of gold, currency, equipment, and in some cases, people. He suggested that the documentation was not lost but was never created in the first place. These ships were ghosts before they ever sank. His claims were never independently verified, and he passed away in 2009 without publishing his full findings. But the number he offered, 11, has haunted researchers ever since. Because if he was right, the wreck off North Carolina is not an anomaly. It is one example of a much larger pattern of deliberate erasure. The ocean keeps what we give it. Every ship that sails carries a story, a crew, a purpose, and a destination. When that story is preserved in the record, we can mourn what was lost and understand why. But when the record itself is erased, we lose something more than a ship. We lose the truth of what happened and why it mattered. Somewhere on the floor of the Atlantic, a ship with no name waits in the dark. It was built by someone. It was sailed by someone. It carried something that mattered enough to keep secret. And when it went down, someone made sure the world would never ask what happened to it. They almost succeeded.